Hey guys, it's Leon here. I want to talk to you about how you could calm the inner critic within. This is a common problem. It's a human problem. First of all, by inner critic, I do not mean when you provide yourself with constructive criticism. What I mean by inner critic is that inner negative, harsh voice within. I'm going to talk about how to calm that. I'm going to provide you with the best practices that are based on research about how you could calm that voice. It's actually counterintuitive advice. Most people do the opposite of this, and it could make it worse, make the inner critical voice worse. I'm drawing from ACT therapy, from NVC. This is completely doable. It's easy to learn. It does take practice, but I'm sure you'll find some immediate short-term benefits as you are developing the skill within yourself. So let's get started. Now, a response to our inner critical voice is often not helpful. What people commonly do is they try to tell the inner critical voice to stop. The problem with this is that the research shows that when we try to get the voice to stop, or when we try to shut it out of our minds, that voice comes back, and often with greater force. The second thing that people commonly do is that they end up being very, very critical towards that inner critical voice. The problem of this is that this adds an additional layer of burden on top of the burden that the inner critical voice is already providing for us. It is like fighting fire with fire, and that gets us to be really, really overwhelmed. What research shows to be a much, much more helpful way to calm the inner critical voice is actually the opposite of this. What is effective is to first notice and become aware of the thought, and secondly, to empathize with the thought. When you notice and become aware of the thought, that means paying attention to it, paying attention to how you react to it, and to be with it in a non-judgmental fashion. And what I mean by empathizing is to notice the emotion that the inner critical voice is carrying. To acknowledge that emotion doesn't mean to agree with the emotion, but to acknowledge that emotion. We're going to practice with some examples, and I'll let you know later how it will be helpful and beneficial to you. The first one is Susan curses at herself after failing her test. Here's a list of emotions from NVC. What do you think she is feeling? There's more than one possible answer. I'm going to choose frustrated, ashamed, and disappointed. Let's say, like Susan, you failed a test and you shout at yourself, "I'm an idiot for failing my test." This is the voice of the inner critic. Instead of fighting with our inner critic and telling it to go away, just notice and observe the voice. State, "My inner critic is saying," and then add what the thought is. In this case, if you thought, "I'm an idiot for failing my test," state to yourself, "My inner critic is saying I'm an idiot for failing my test." This will help us gain distance from the thought so it has less power over us. Next, ask yourself what your inner critic is feeling. Like Susan, your inner critic may be feeling frustrated, ashamed, and disappointed. But of course, it really depends on how you are experiencing your inner critic. The next example is John has had it with his dog and yells at it for driving him nuts. What emotions is he feeling? There's more than one possible answer, but I'm choosing overwhelmed, angry, and tense. Let's say, like how John had it with his thoughts and they're driving him nuts. Your thoughts are driving you nuts and you shout at yourself, "I had it with my thoughts." In this case, I tell myself, my inner critic is saying I had it with my thoughts. I want to note that it's helpful to see thoughts acting like unruly animals, just like John's dog. That's why we use the phrase, the monkey mind. What emotions may your inner critic be feeling when it had it with your thoughts? Let's say you're shivering before going on stage, and you think, "Don't go on stage, you won't do well." How can you state this differently using the phrase, the inner critic is saying? What emotions may your inner critic be feeling? Now, you might be wondering why I'm using examples involving other people. The reason for this is that it's actually easier for us to be objective and non-attached when we're working on problems involving examples of other people first before we apply the same methods on ourselves. What you'll find is that when you start to empathize with other people instead of telling them to stop or critiquing them, they actually calm down much better. Telling them to stop or critiquing them might actually agitate them and gets them going more. The same thing is true with your inner critical voice. When you treat your inner critical voice like another person, and when you start to empathize with that voice instead of telling it to stop or critiquing it, it's actually much more likely to calm down. And it is helpful to think about your inner critical voice as if it's another person. It helps us to deal with it much more objectively and in a non-attached kind of manner. The first thing you want to do is to notice the inner critical voice. And that's when you do that exercise where you name what the inner critical voice is saying. My inner critical voice is saying, and then put down what that thought is. When you're able to notice the thought, what happens is that it diffuses the thought. It gives that thought much less power over you. It's very different from pushing that thought away from your consciousness. When you do that, that thought comes back. The second thing you want to be able to do is to name and acknowledge the emotion behind the inner critical voice. And when you're able to do that, it also helps diffuse the thought as well. And when you're acknowledging your thoughts and you're acknowledging your emotions, that is very different from agreeing with them or saying that they're right or you have to obey them. Hey guys, there you have it. When you observe the thought, as critical as they may be, without judging them, and when you could observe the emotions behind them, even if they're anger or sadness or any number of stigmatized emotions, without stigmatizing them, you tend to do better. If you want to know the different forms that the critical voice takes so that you could practice this exercise, I'll have it up here. And also, if you like this video, you could help me out, get subscribed to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.